We assume a finished film is final. That once the editing is done, once the director calls it a wrap, what we're watching is the intended vision, the story, as it was meant to be. But in action cinema, the truth is rarely that simple. Sometimes, after the cameras stop rolling and the credits are locked, decisions are made behind closed doors. Executives panic, test audiences flinch, international censors make a phone call. And suddenly, what once was raw becomes rewritten. Not on set, but in a sound booth. Dialogue is altered. Entire performances are replaced. What we hear is not what was recorded. These changes are invisible. There's no press release, no fanfare, only silence. Because when the voice changes but the face stays the same, most viewers never notice. And that's the point. Whether to soften political undertones, erase ambiguity, or simply inject marketable clarity, studios have reworked dozens of films in post-production, often without the audience, or even the actors, knowing. What we're left with is a version that feels off, not wrong, just unreal. Like an echo of something truer underneath the surface. In this episode, we're exposing 15 action films that were completely reimagined after they were supposedly finished. The footage remained untouched, but the voices, meanings, and messages were twisted, reshaped to fit an agenda that had nothing to do with storytelling. This isn't about deleted scenes. This is about transformation by erasure. Let's dig into the films that were rewritten after the fact and uncover the versions that were never meant to disappear. Fact 1. The Octagon, 1980. The Octagon introduced something that no other action film at the time dared to try. A constant, whispered stream of thought from Chuck Norris's character, a haunting internal monologue. It became iconic, but it wasn't part of the original script. The film was shot and edited without a single voiceover. Norris's character was meant to be enigmatic, a blank slate driven by instinct and trauma, but test audiences were confused, and producers feared they'd lose the narrative thread. The fix? Record a full track of inner dialogue, written well after filming had ended. Lines like, "I know who they are," and "I can't stop them," were never conceived during production. They were patched in later, transforming a silent warrior into a haunted narrator. Critics praised the psychological layer. But in truth, it wasn't part of the plan. It was post-production improvisation dressed as depth. And in doing so, the film changed forever, not by what it showed, but by what it whispered. Fact 2. Laser Mission, 1989. Laser Mission, starring Brandon Lee, was marketed as a light, fast-paced spy caper. But behind its glossy exterior was a quieter, more personal version, a story about trust and betrayal, about the cost of secrecy. That version never made it to shelves. Scenes exploring the protagonist's emotional hesitation were either trimmed or buried under newly dubbed dialogue lines that reframed him as confident, flippant, and emotionally untouchable. Worse still, several of those dubbed lines weren't even Brandon Lee's voice. The studio wanted a leading man who could joke under pressure, not one who faltered under the weight of his mission. So they replaced tension with quips and fear with charm. What was once a conflicted character became an action figure with catchphrases. And the moments where he hesitated most, now filled with noise that didn't belong to him. Fact 3. Red Scorpion, 1988. Red Scorpion is remembered for its explosive action and Cold War allegory, a Soviet operative who changes sides and joins a rebel uprising in Africa. But in its original form, the film wasn't about heroism. It was about collapse. Lundgren's character was scripted to unravel slowly. He didn't find a new purpose. He lost the old one. His silence was never noble, it was numbness. But ambiguity doesn't sell well. After test audiences failed to connect, the studio intervened. New lines were written and dubbed in, giving the character manufactured clarity. He now spoke of justice, liberation, and truth, buzzwords that hadn't existed on the page or on set. The change was effective and hollow. The emotional weight was gone. What remained was a revision of his journey, not a transformation, but a correction. In making him understandable, they made him less human. Fact 4. McBain, 1991. McBain, headlined by Christopher Walken, never aimed for realism. A renegade team, a foreign dictator, a revolution sparked by grief. It was a cinematic fever dream. But inside that dream was a closing scene that almost said something real. Walken's character, standing before a liberated people, was originally meant to speak without applause. His monologue wasn't celebratory. It was accusatory, pointing fingers not at the enemy, but at the country that made him what he was. But that monologue was too direct. The visuals remained untouched. But the speech? Rewritten, re-recorded, and edited to sound like a victory statement. Phrases about intervention, corruption, and complicity were replaced with generic declarations of justice and freedom. A trailer released months earlier still includes a line from the original monologue. It never appeared in the film, and that says everything. Fact 5. Rage. 1995. Rage unfolds like a nightmare. An ordinary man, pumped full of an experimental drug, becomes a walking weapon. The chaos is constant, but there was a moment, one scene that brought it all into terrifying focus. The original ending wasn't loud. It was quiet. After surviving the system that tried to erase him, the protagonist muttered a final line, broken, bitter, unresolved. It was meant to be the emotional payoff, not victory, but ruin. But the test audiences didn't clap, so the studio made a swap. A different line was dubbed over the same footage, now delivered with a smirk and followed by a massive explosion. The message flipped. What was once trauma became triumph. Gary Daniels was never told. He found out in the theater, and the final shot, once filled with consequence, became a crowd pleaser built on denial. Fact 6. The Peacekeeper. 1997. The Peacekeeper had all the right elements for a late 90 seconds action thriller. A nuclear device, rogue agents, and a lone soldier caught in a conspiracy bigger than himself. But what it had in its earliest version was something less expected: doubt. One scene showed a heated exchange in the war room, where commanders questioned the ethics of retaliation, not its effectiveness. Another moment exposed the political cost of rushing into action without clarity. The performances were subtle, tense, frighteningly plausible. But plausibility gave way to predictability. Studio executives, fearing the film might appear too political, ordered a wide-ranging redub of key scenes. Lines were rewritten to strip ambiguity. The tone shifted to reinforce patriotism, and the soundtrack was softened to keep emotions at bay. The edits didn't just reshape the story. They redefined the film's intent. What could have been a rare moment of self-awareness in an action movie became just another flag-draped fantasy. Fact 7. American Samurai. 1992. American Samurai was built around a familiar setup, an outsider adopted by a foreign tradition, now fighting to prove his worth. Beneath the surface, it touched on cultural legacy, loyalty, and restraint. But you'd never know that from the final cut. When test audiences asked for more intensity, the producers didn't shoot new scenes, they dubbed in new audio during fight sequences. Grunts became growls. Silent warriors shouted phrases like, "Kill him," and "Finish it," none of which had been filmed. The overdubs clashed with the characters' philosophies, with their facial expressions, with the rhythm of the action. Some actors didn't recognize their own scenes. A film that once flirted with tradition ended up screaming through a loudspeaker because someone thought louder meant better. And something was lost in that volume. Fact 8. Eye of the Eagle. 1987. At a glance, Eye of the Eagle plays like another jungle war action flick. Firefights, betrayal, grizzled soldiers. But there was one scene, just one, that was never supposed to make it through untouched. In the film's original cut, a jaded American operative delivers a blistering monologue about the futility of war. Not scripted heroism, not rehearsed courage. Just a quiet admission that none of it made sense anymore. It was powerful, and that made it a problem. Rather than remove the moment, the studio dubbed over the original speech, injecting vague phrases about duty and honor to steer the message back toward patriotism. The footage stayed the same, but the meaning was rewritten. A few years later, the raw version aired uncensored on a local network in Manila. The difference was staggering. Same scene, different Seoul. Fact 9. Delta Force 3, The Killing Game. Delta Force 3. The Killing Game was supposed to reintroduce the franchise with a new face and darker tone. The protagonist, a hardened special ops leader, wasn't written to be likable. He was written to be real, cold, calculated, borderline unstable. The performance leaned into moral grayness. He wasn't there to save the day. He was there to get the job done, no matter the cost. But when producers previewed the early cut, they panicked. Focus groups described the lead as untrustworthy. That was enough. Instead of reshooting, they subtly re-engineered the character in post. Lines were re-recorded. Tone was softened. Dialogue that once hinted at inner conflict became patriotic boilerplate. The lips said one thing. The new voice said something safer. Cassavetes, who played the role, later reflected on the release with a single sentence. They turned a question mark into a slogan. Fact 10. Strike Commando. 2. 1988. Strike Commando 2 never aimed for subtlety. Its mission was chaos, explosions, one-liners, villains chewing scenery. But there was one performance so bizarre, it pushed even those boundaries until the studio decided to pull it back. The character of Kramit, a villain with a maniacal pitch and absurd delivery, was played like a live-action cartoon. That was the charm. That was the point. But test audiences laughed in the wrong places. Embarrassed by the unintended comedy, producers erased Kramit's voice entirely, replacing it with a deeper, gruffer tone. The new voice didn't fit the body, nor the energy, but it was serious enough to move forward. The edit turned a memorable oddity into a forgettable antagonist. A few fans in Southeast Asia still circulate VHS tapes containing the original audio. To them, the ridiculous Kramit was the film's identity. But now, he's just another bad guy with a borrowed growl. Fact 11, Joshua Tree. 1993. Dolph Lundgren's Joshua Tree was meant to simmer, not shout. His character, a fugitive framed and hunted, was written to convey more through silence than through words. But silence, apparently, wasn't enough for the studio. Post-screening notes complained of emotional distance. The solution? Add thoughts he never thought. The studio commissioned voiceover narration written after editing. These lines were layered onto scenes where Lundgren says nothing, often contradicting the expressions on his face. Worse, the narration wasn't voiced by him but by an actor with a smoother, more philosophical tone. The final product feels disconnected. The body moves with intention. The voice speaks like it's reading a book. For audiences, the film became a confused echo. For those who knew the original script, it was something else. A hijacked performance. Fact 12, Diplomatic Immunity. 1991. Diplomatic immunity rides on a premise soaked in rage. A grieving father hunts down the killer of his daughter, shielded by the protections of international law. But in the original version, the antagonist wasn't just a symbol of untouchable power. He had a voice that made you uncomfortable. Todo inconfortable. His lines were delivered with theatrical arrogance, steeped in cultural specificity and venom. But when early overseas distributors pushed back, labeling the portrayal politically volatile, the studio acted. They didn't cut the role. They dismantled it through sound. The character's voice was fully redubbed for several international releases, stripped of accent, force, and presence. What had been a sharp, ideologically charged villain became a bland mouthpiece. The result? A performance hollowed from within. The actor, unaware of the redub, later said in an interview, "They left my face but erased everything underneath it." He wasn't exaggerating. Fact 13, The Patriot, 1986. The Patriot, 1986, was never designed to be a hero's tale. The protagonist, a reclusive biowarfare expert, was portrayed with cold calculation. His performance was quiet, unreadable, laced with moral discomfort. But after post-screening reactions came in, that discomfort was deemed a liability. Producers wanted confidence. So they hired a new voice actor and dubbed over most of Greg Henry's lines, altering not only the delivery but the intention. What had been hesitation became certainty. What had been internal conflict became scripted bravado. To the naked eye, nothing changed. But listen closely, and you'll feel it. The words don't match the face. Henry himself wasn't told. He learned the truth sitting in a theater watching a character he had built from the inside out, now speaking with someone else's voice. It wasn't post-production, it was post-identity. Fact 14. Death Before Dishonor, 1987. Death Before Dishonor sets itself up as pure patriotic action. Soldiers, honor, sacrifice. But inside that uniformed fantasy, there once lived a very different heartbeat. One scene, in particular, was meant to rupture expectations. A bloodied Marine, tied down, delivers a monologue, not of pride, but disillusionment. In the raw audio, he questions the very country that sent him to die. The studio found that tone too subversive. Rather than cut the scene, they left the visuals intact but re-recorded the dialogue, replacing doubt with determination. The lip sync isn't perfect, but it's close enough to slip past the average viewer. until the original shooting script leaked years later, and suddenly, that inspirational speech revealed itself to be something else entirely. A cry of betrayal, not bravery. Fact 15. Chain of Command. When Chain of Command was first screened internally, one character stood out not for their performance, but for what they represented. The main antagonist, originally portrayed with biting rhetoric and heavy ideology, was too believable, too real. The studio decided that realism was a risk. In the final cut, his entire voice track was replaced. The footage remained, but the villain's tone was stripped of nuance. Where once he delivered scathing critiques of Western intervention, the redubbed version offered vague threats and emotionless commands. The transformation didn't stop at sound, it reshaped the character's core. In some international cuts, the original audio slipped through briefly, revealing a far more layered portrayal. But in the domestic release, what could have been a rare, intelligent villain became background noise. And most viewers never knew a voice had vanished. Bonus fact: Steel Justice, 1987. Some films don't just get rewritten. They get rewritten twice by two different countries. Border Heat, 1990, was a joint US-Mexico production that centered on a DEA agent and a corrupt federal network. It was gritty, violent, and politically charged. In its first version, the agent questions the entire war on drugs. His allies turn on him. And the ending? Utterly bleak. That version never left the editing bay. The American distributor demanded changes. The protagonist was dubbed with a more heroic voice. His motives were rewritten to sound unwavering and noble. And instead of a betrayal at the end, the film closed with a voiceover victory speech and a slow-motion shot of the flag. But here's where it gets stranger. In Mexico, a different version was released. That version had its own redub, tailored for local audiences. There, the American agent was portrayed as arrogant and out of his depth. His lines were reworked to sound naive. The real hero? A Mexican detective whose voice was given more weight in the re-edit. Same footage. Two entirely different stories. Two conflicting truths. There is no original version of Border Heat. Each was rewritten to serve a narrative convenient to the region. And neither, it seems, reflects what the filmmakers intended. A film split in two, its meaning lost between borders and between languages. What does it mean when a film finishes, but keeps changing? These weren't deleted scenes or alternate endings. They were deliberate rewrites, done in silence after the cast went home, after the lights shut down, after the truth had already been filmed. So ask yourself, did you really watch the film or just the version someone wanted you to see? Which of these changes surprised you most? Have you ever felt like a character was saying words that didn't belong to them? Let us know, because sometimes what's unsaid tells the loudest story.